Hey y'all, welcome back to Hot Grits and Haints, where we talk about all things mystical, magical, and deeply soulful. As you know, I'm Cece, and today we're going to talk about something that I think a lot of people are wrestling with, or at least have wrestled with at some point in their lives. And that is the feeling of being pulled into too many directions. You got dreams and talents and passions, and maybe more than one calling. And let me go ahead and make you a promise right now. If you stay with me to the end of this video and really lean into the exercises and practices I'm about to share, you're going to walk away with something you've been chasing for a long time. Clarity. That's right. Clarity. Not the kind of clarity that you get from logic or from to-do list, but from deep down in your bones, from knowing yourself and understanding your assignment in life. You might be jumping around from one thing to the next. You in love with one idea on Monday, and then by Friday, you got a whole new dream. And to make it even more confusing, I bet you're actually good at all of it. Talented, creative, full of potential, but still wondering, what am I supposed to be doing? Well, I see you because I am you, right? And today we're going to talk about how to quiet all that noise and finally hear the one voice that matters, the one that comes straight from the spirit, straight from the universe, the one that already knows where you're going. So sit tight and go ahead and grab yourself a notepad and a pen, because that's right, we're going to go to school today, y'all, because I want y'all to take a few notes, because we're working through something that's real. And trust me, you're going to need these tools, and I'm going to show you exactly what to do with them in just a little bit. So, like I said before, I want to help you to get to the root of the one problem, and that is not knowing what to focus on, because you love too many things. Your heart is full, your ideals are plentiful, and your time. I mean, just talking about time, y'all, we are living in such a busy world. We're running from here to there, stuck in traffic. Some of y'all are out here working 2, 3 jobs because the economy is so bad. And we're really running short on time and being able to take that time to care for ourselves. Because it's not just about caring for your physical self. It's also about caring for your mental health as well as your spiritual health. So let's get into it. So I'm going to tell y'all a little something about me. When I was in college, I chose to study philosophy. And I fell deeply and passionately in love with it. So much that I decided to major in it, right? But then I had the opportunity to study abroad and travel extensively throughout the Caribbean and South America. And, I know y'all know where this is going, right? I fell deeply and passionately in love with that also. So much that I ended up entering the dual degree program in my university. So I basically ended up with a BA in philosophy and an MA in Latin American literature. And at the time, being a young woman, I thought I was hot stuff, completing 2 degrees in 2 different areas of study. But in reality, it made it really hard for me to market myself. And to add to that, I had this deep burning love for languages and travel. And at one time, I had the chance to live and work abroad for a little while. And I thought, at that time, I'm going to become a diplomat, because I got interested in all of these government policies and stuff, right? And, well, that didn't work out either. And the sad part was that I was good at all of these things, but I was still very confused about which one I should commit to, as most of us are. And then I met my husband and got married, and I became a mama. And you know what? I fell completely, utterly, passionately in love with my children. And I realized that being a mother was a sacred calling too. Raising my babies, loving them and building a home full of love and soul. That became my center. And I loved it, But now my children are young adults. They both graduated college and they're living their own lives. And I have come back around. I've rediscovered old passions, and I've even found some new ones. I'm a writer, a content creator, an artist, a professional gardener. And if I'm being real, I do a lot of things that I really, really, really love and that I'm good at, But if you're watching this, I know some of y'all probably are in the same boat. You got gifts upon gifts, and you're that friend that everybody calls because you can do it all. But being multi-talented can start to feel like a burden when you don't know which lane to pour yourself into. So let's slow it down for a bit. Because this ain't about doing less. It's more about doing what aligns with the universe, with your spirit, and with what the ancestors are telling you, because they are always ready to help you figure it out, right? I want to share something about something that shifted everything for me. Because I used to think that being multi-talented meant I had to choose one thing and let everything else fall away. But I don't really believe that anymore. Because a few years ago, I came across this Japanese concept called Ikigai. Now, Ikigai is a blend of two words. Iki, meaning to live, and Gai, meaning reason. So together, it basically means like a reason to live. Or you can interpret it as like your life's passion. As having a sense of purpose in life and being motivated towards that passion. It's often visualized as the intersection of four key elements. For example, the first one is like what you love, right? Or what you love, or what is your passion, right? The second one is like, what are you good at, which is like your vocation. And the third one is like, what does the world need, which is your mission. Or the fourth one, which is what can you be paid for? And that one is your profession. And when all four overlap, you achieve what is called Ikigai, or a fulfilling and purposeful life path. Now, like I said, when I first read this, I still kind of was a little confused about it. And I kept thinking that it meant, okay, do I have to pick one thing that lines up with all four of those categories? Do I have to pick one thing that I can get paid for, that I'm passionate about, and that people need, and all of that? Do I have to align all of that into one thing? But no, that's not what it really meant. What it really means is that many of us do have multiple purposes and callings. And those multiple purposes and callings are actually very much aligned with the true spirit of Ikigai, right? Because Ikigai is not one fixed thing. It's a dynamic journey, not a single destination. You might have many Ikigais over a lifetime, or even, at once. Your passions can evolve, and that's natural. And I mean, if we were just to think about that for a second, because think about, when you were 25, if you're a woman of my age, because I'm in my late 40s, and when I was 25, what was important to me at that point in my life is not what is necessarily important to me now. And so based on that, your Ikigai can adapt with you and your passion and the things that change. So you are perfectly okay to mix and layer passions. For example, let's say, I don't know, someone loves storytelling, right? And they're also great at community organizing. And they also are good at they deeply care about youth empowerment. And but they also happen to earn a living as a filmmaker. Their Ikigai could combine into all four and become where they can create documentaries that inspire social change in youth communities. So that multiple Ikigais that they have can merge into that one thing. So you don't have to pick a passion and discard the rest. Instead, you can look at how they can complement and build upon one another. Now, where I'm really going with this is that many of you probably already knew that it's okay to have many interests and talents and things like that, right? And yet you don't necessarily have to pick one. But the real problem is that a lot of us are still very much confused, or maybe you feel like you're not good at anything, or you're not really feeling particularly motivated, or maybe you're scared about something, right? Because, there's a lot going on in the world right now. And, there's so much uncertainty. And living in those states of uncertainty can create stress. And that can demotivate us. And it can also make us feel scared that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So we're afraid to take chances today because, we got to have some security or whatever, you're trying to decide. But, I want you to have some tools to help you learn how to attune yourself to your path. So that's what I promised today. So we're going to get into that right now. So in Hoodoo and spiritual traditions, we say that you have a voice, and the voice that lives in your inner voice, and that inner voice that kind of lives in your head, it's your spirit, right? Sometimes it can be interpreted as being your ancestors because they're the ones that always know what's coming before we do. But, there's many other areas of study where we also interpret signs and symbols. And, of course, we have astrology, which we can see different things through our moon sign and our sun sign and how we feel our way through life. And, like I said, there are many ways that the universe can whisper through symbols and dreams and these different esoteric subjects, right? But whether you're rooted in witchcraft, prayer, or just plain gut instinct, that voice that you hear, it's divine. It's you, but it's more ancient and it's more infinite than you have any idea, right? And as I said before, just because you have more than one passion doesn't mean you're confused. It means you're full of creativity, full of purpose, full of potential. And some of us are meant to walk in a straight line, but others, we're like rivers, we curve and twist. And as my mama used to say, we touch many banks, and that doesn't mean that you're lost. It just means that you flow. But the trick is to learn how to listen, to really listen for that assignment and that alignment with the universe. And that's where most of us stumble. That's where your inner voice comes in. And we often don't know how to recognize our inner voice or to even hear it in the first place. Less more trust it, right? Because let's talk about that for a moment. You might ask yourself, why can't I hear it? I'm trying to figure that out down here. I'm trying to figure out what I need to be doing. Why don't I hear it? And then when I do hear it, why don't I trust it? Well, here's the truth. Many of us were trained out of our intuition. We were told from an early age that reason matters more than feeling, and that logic is safe and intuition is foolish, that dreams are distractions, and if you can't prove it, hey, it ain't even real, right? And on top of that, life teaches us to doubt ourselves. We go through betrayals and disappointment and failure, and each time we get burned, a little part of us shuts down, and we stop trusting ourselves. We silence the voice within us because somewhere along the line, the world has taught us that someone else's voice matters more. So when your spirit whispers, this is the way, this is the choice, this is what you should be doing, you automatically second guess it. You go around and you ask 10 other people their opinion, right? And you come and then you often end up more confused than you were before you started asking for opinions, right? And then after all of that, you wait for permission from people that never comes. And then someone else ends up owning your narrative. And you end up living out your own life. But someone else is writing the story for you. But your inner voice is still there. It's still steady, and it's still waiting for you to hear it again. And that's what we're going to work on today. Not just chasing passions, but aligning your true calling and learning to hear that quiet, sacred voice and learning to trust it again. Ask yourself, which passion feels like peace, even when it's hard? Which one keeps showing up in your dreams? Which one feels like a quiet yes in your chest? That's the voice. It doesn't yell. It doesn't shout, It leads. Now, if you're feeling disconnected or overwhelmed, because sometimes life does get too hard to hear the subtle things. But you don't have to be hard on yourself about that. And don't worry, because we've all been there. I've been there. But here are my top 5 best ways to retune yourself to that voice. The first one is silence. That's right. Silence. Silence is sacred. But we've been taught to fear the quiet because we always feel that we have to have some sound or some noise or be talking. And then we have to fill every space with something. Right? And sometimes we're afraid of silence because sometimes silence reveals too much. Right? That's that time when you get to thinking and you're like, hey, I don't think I should be with this guy, or I don't know, this job is not feeling right. And we push those thoughts back because we don't want to have, sometimes it's hard to change. And I get that. I understand that. But that's exactly the point of silence. It brings us face to face with ourselves, our desires, our fears, and our truth. And it's in those quiet moments, real quiet moments, that your spirit begins to speak. And if you want to find your path, you're going to have to turn down the volume, and you can start small, with 5 to 10 minutes a day with just no noise. Just breathe. I work from home and I usually start working like around 6 a.m. So I've developed like an 11 a.m. ritual because by that time I've been working for about 5 hours and I have had it, y'all. I really am in need of a break. So, I'll go into the kitchen and pour myself a cup of coffee, and sometimes it's sweet tea because, I'm a Southern girl. And I'll take it out onto our back patio and I'll sit in the sun and sip it. And I'll usually spend another 10 minutes or so just sitting and taking in the beautiful flowers and the sky and the birds and just sitting there, and it's actually become one of my favorite times of the day, and going back to what I said before, we often think the silence is empty, but it isn't. It's full of answers, of guidance and alignment. So I want you to try to sit with it, to take that time for yourself and try to sit with it. And it might feel a little strange at first, but if you stick with it, trust me, you'll start to hear some answers. Because it's in that stillness that you might finally hear the voice that you've been searching for all along, And I'm going to move on to number 2. Another of my favorite ways to connect when I'm searching for answers and trying to figure out the next move in life is journaling. And I don't mean just writing down, what you did for the day or what you ate for lunch or that you think your new neighbor is sexy, right? I'm talking about journaling with intention, So when we sit down to write, make it a ritual. And I will say that when you're trying to find an answer, it's a good idea to set the intention by doing something special. So I have one particular spot in my house where I write because it's comfortable, it's private, and I don't know. It just, it has a certain kind of feeling to it. And I just feel most at peace and connected with the universe when I sit in this particular spot in my home. And I'll usually light a candle, but you can do anything. You can burn your favorite incense or put some fresh flowers in a vase, or, if you're feeling some negative energy or, just feeling a little depressed, a little down, you can say an affirmation to release that negative energy. And you can cleanse the room with some Palo Santo or some sage or, whatever is your preference. But whatever you choose, sit but wherever you choose to sit or whatever you choose to do, let it be something that centers you. Ask the universe, what do I need to know about my path? Then just write. Let your hand move before your brain has time to edit. Just write. And don't worry if it makes sense right away. Write first and understand later. The hope is that your soul will reveal what it's holding when the pen hits the page. In my case, I sometimes just end up with some notes on some writing ideas, just like the universe just giving me ideas about writing, things that I can write, and then sometimes recently I sat down to journal, and I had been struggling a little bit with my workflow, and I feel like I managed my time pretty good, but sometimes I just feel a little overwhelmed, like I just don't have enough time in the day to get everything done. And so I've been struggling with that and not really putting it in the front of my mind, but in the back of my mind, I had been feeling it. And when I sat down to journal the other day, I ended up coming up with a list of ways to improve my workflow. And they were little things, but they were big things because they did help me to adjust myself. And one of those was to adjust my expectations that I'm just one person and I can only get, so much done in the course of a day, right? And like everything else, this journaling may take some practice. So it's okay if you don't get that clarity on the first or second try, but keep at it because you're going to start to get more answers. The third tool that I use is ancestor connection, which it can be considered like a sort of prayer. But before I get into this, I want to talk a little bit about prayer in general, because as we know, prayer can be deeply personal. Its meaning can shift depending on the culture, the tradition, the religious and spiritual intention. And, this is the type that we're most familiar with, which is the religious prayer associated with religious practice, where the petitioner is in communication with God or some higher power, And this form of prayer is typically directed upward to a divine being. And, it's seen as separate from the human world. And the petitioner will often give thanks. They can ask for guidance or help and even forgiveness, for something that they feel like they've done, or simply offer praise. And I want to say that if this is where you are more comfortable, then by all means, you can use religious prayer as a path to seek answers, as well as, using ancestral prayer. But because at the end of the day, it's all about turning inward so you can hear that inner voice. But in my spiritual practice, prayer is all about seeking the guidance of the ancestors. And you can do this by setting up a simple altar, which could just be a glass of water, a photo, a small candle. And these altars can vary. They're as varied as your own personal needs and taste. But if you want some ideas, you can drop me a note in the comments below, and I'd be happy to give you some ideas on how to set up your ancestral altar. But once you have the altar set up, you can say the names of your ancestors out loud. Speak to them like they're family because, they are essentially, right? Ask for guidance and incorporate. And I often incorporate my ancestral prayers into my daily routine because just like when you're cultivating a relationship, you just met someone and you're like, oh, I think this is a really cool person and I want to get to know them and stuff. You don't want to just call on that friend, when you need something. You want to establish a relationship so that it's mutual because you got to remember the ancestors have walked this road before you and they want to help you, but they also want to be remembered. So I would suggest that, like myself, to somewhat make it a part of your daily routine of prayer and practice and meditation to include your ancestral prayers every day. Now, you'll know when the ancestors are near because the signs will come. Sometimes it's a dream that just feels a little too real, a little too real for your taste, or it's a song that, that'll hit your spirit just right. So you have to pay attention because the ancestors, they speak in subtle ways, you know. And so whether you choose religious prayer or ancestral prayer, just know that both can be powerful tools in helping you find guidance. And some people use both, you know, because both can coexist. You know, both can offer strength and wisdom and spiritual connection from every direction. Now you're covered on all ends. Because at the end of the day, you know, my daddy used to always say that it's just two paths to the same source, really. You know? So the fourth tool I want to share with you guys today is divination. So what is divination? Simply, it is the spiritual practice of seeking insight and answers or guidance by interpreting signs, symbols, or tools. And let me just be clear up front with this now. It's not about predicting the future, especially with any level of certainty, you know, because there are times where we feel like the future is being predicted, but it's really just going to be the logical outcome of a certain decision. You know, you decide to cross the road, there's a possibility that you may, you know, get a mud puddle splashed on you or something, you know. So that just clarify that before we go any farther. But it's more about tapping into your intuition and your ancestral wisdom or divine energy to gain clarity on a question or situation. These tools do not hold your answers. You do, right? They simply turn up the volume on your inner knowing. So you can think of them as mirrors, you know, they reflect what's already inside of you. You know, they are not fortune tellers, these tools, they're amplifiers. They just make it louder for you to be able to hear your own inner wisdom. And you can choose any of these divination methods that I'm about to talk about. And most likely you'll find yourself drawn to one or two in particular. Tarot cards are one of my go-tos, and I find that they're better for emotional clarity, storylines, and basic life path insights, right? Now, my second favorite is scrying, which is like looking into a crystal ball or crystal ball gazing. But in Hoodoo, we use a bowl of water. And this one is best for to get messages from the subconscious or the spirit, or when you're asking for ancestral help and insight into your dreams, you know. Also in Hoodoo is the practice of throwing bones. But, you know, you don't have to throw actual bones. You can throw shells or coins or stones. And throwing bones is a great for receiving ancestral messages. And especially when you find that you're at a spiritual crossroad, like, you know, like you need a lot of help making a decision, a tough decision. And also throwing bones kind of gives you, if you're doing other types of root work, it can add an extra layer of clarity for you. Now, there's also many other forms of divination tools that you can use. And of course, the pendulum is one. And that one is best for like yes, no questions or just quick checks of energy, you know, or if you just need like a little quick read on something. And then runes are also another one. Now, I haven't worked much with runes at all, but I have a friend who uses them regularly. And she says that they've helped her a lot, especially when she needs to make like strength-based advice, you know, like when you're needing to have the courage to do something or to make a change. And it's really great for tapping into those ancient Norse archetypes of war and battle. And I had an aunt who religiously practiced tea leaf reading. Now, tea leaf reading is more about symbolic insight, you know, emotional weather or the temperature of something, the timing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movie Eve's Bayou, but when the aunt does her readings, it's very similar to how you read something, and it's more based in feelings. It's more colored in feelings and emotions versus it being a clear decision. It was more giving that type of evaluation of the emotional state of the person and how that emotional state would lead to certain outcomes, or if based on your emotional state, if it was the right timing for something. If that's more clear. And then, like I just said, there are many other tools of divination, and I would love it if you guys would drop a comment for me about the ones that you're working with, because, spiritual practice is a journey. So, and I'm always needing and wanting to learn new things. And there's not a right or wrong way to go about divination, but I do have a few suggestions. And the first one is, before you get started, to clear the space. Find somewhere that's private where you won't be interrupted. You can burn some incense, light a candle. I even speak an invocation to welcome the clarity. And then of course, you want to set your intention. You want to name the question, and you want to ask for that specific guidance that you're seeking. So be ready. And then, more importantly, you need to be ready for the answer. So what do I mean by that? So you need to enter a receptive state, relax, breathe deeply, and connect to the spirit, and open your awareness. And then I always like to finish my reading by journaling what my question was, and what tools I used, and what showed up, and what my first interpretation of the reading was. Now, everybody has different ways that they do it, but I do think that keeping a journal can help you to understand yourself and understand the issue that you're dealing with, and also help you to get a better answer. Because sometimes things don't always come in one session or one time. Sometimes it's over the course of 4 or 5 days, or sometimes over the course of a month. And if you're not keeping track of it, because we have so much other stuff going on in our head, we'll forget some of those messages. So it's always good to put them in your journal and to have them handy, so you can go back and read through it and say, oh, okay, now I can see that this is taking shape, right? Because sometimes what didn't make sense the first time you did a reading might make sense the third time you did a reading. Kind of like, when you're reading a book, and in that book, you don't understand what's happening in chapter 3. You're like, this makes no sense. And then you get to chapter 16, you're like, oh my God, that is exactly what the author was writing. This is the plot. Yeah, I understand now. And so it's kind of like that, right? And then at the end of your reading, you want to take a moment to sit in reflection, because just like I just said, that sometimes insights unfold slowly, and you want to always be sure at the end of every session, anytime you talk to the ancestors, anytime you seek guidance from your higher self, you want to give thanks. You want to say thank you, because that is very important, because gratitude brings a certain energy to things as well. And so you want to always make sure that you give that gratitude. And then you want to remember that at the end of the day, you want to remember that divination is not about control. It's about partnership with the unseen. These tools, like I said before, they amplify your intuition and connect you to the larger spiritual rhythms. And they can help you make aligned decisions and uncover emotional truths, and even speak with the ancestors who are always walking with you, right? And then the last tool that I want to talk about is the practice of dream work, because dream work is basically when you explore your dreams as messages from your subconscious or higher self, or even ancestral guides. And, because while we sleep, our inner world is still happening. Our consciousness is still out here doing, whatever. It's going places, it's doing things. And most importantly, when you dream, those dreams are unfiltered by logic or fear. So basically, when you are dreaming something, you are getting the unfiltered and the true virginal, for lack of a better word, version of something. Because it hasn't been, you haven't had to think about it, you haven't had to logify it. It is pure, straightforward messaging, right? And then dreams often reflect our deepest desires, those unresolved emotions, right? And so it's when you're trying to figure out something, sometimes before I go to sleep, I will actually ask the universe, show me what I need to know. And many times my dreams have helped me to resolve hidden emotions and inner conflicts that I didn't even know I had. Stuff that my subconscious is trying to work out, baggage, psychological baggage or whatever you want to call it, that I'm carrying around, that I don't even know I'm carrying around, that is affecting how I'm moving in the world, right? And through that dream, I'm able to say, okay, what does this mean? Why do I keep dreaming about this? Why did I have this crazy dream, And it can help you to work that out. So once again, I'm going to pull you back to journaling again. And I would say, keep a journal, a dream journal by your bed. And I would write down everything, even if it feels random or strange or bizarre. I just like to write them down because dreams are symbolic. And when you look back, you're going to see those messages that start to come through, much like how when I was talking about using a divination tools, about how, it might not be clear at first, but, over a period of 2-3 nights or 2-3 weeks, you look back at those dreams and you're like, oh my gosh, this is what I needed to be doing. This is what the universe was trying to tell me, because that's your spirit who's been working overtime. It's like, girl, guy, pay attention, And so, with that, that's pretty much all I have today as far as the tools and the tools to use to find yourself and find your passion when you're searching for something. These are just a few ways to start coming back to yourself. Not to who the world told you to be, but to the you who already knows. And when you start listening again, that's when the magic really starts, And here's what I want you to take away. That you're not scattered, you're layered. Your path is not missing. It's still unfolding, And that inner voice, that hum of the universe is always with you. You just gotta slow down enough to hear it. So when you're caught between passions, don't panic. Just sit with your spirit. Light a candle. Ask the question. But more importantly, trust that nudge. Because the answer is already within you. Just waiting for you to get quiet enough to say, I'm listening. Listen close. This is Hot Grits and Haints. Remember, the universe is always whispering.